Well, hello everyone, and welcome. I'm Danny Lichtenfeld, Director of the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center, and really happy that you've chosen to be here today. Thank you. This is the fourth of 5 events that we've organized this fall in connection with the exhibit up in the main gallery having to do with guns. And the purpose of these events has been to try to expand our knowledge of guns and gun issues, to stimulate some discussion, and then hopefully through increased knowledge and discussion and getting a better understanding of each other's viewpoints to become a little bit stronger as a community. Certainly not every exhibit that we present here at the museum. I don't know how many of you are regulars here. How many people have never been in here before? Oh, great. Well, welcome. We present exhibits of contemporary art, and certainly not all the exhibits that we present lend themselves as strongly as this one to some community reflection and discussion. Some do, like for example, last fall we had an exhibit up here of paintings having to do with the forestry industry, and we had a great panel discussion about that and a number of talks. So when the opportunity presents itself, we like to be able to do this kind of thing where we use the artwork as a departure point to talk about issues of relevance beyond the art itself, but in our community. So that being said, I hope you'll have a chance, if you haven't already, to look at the exhibit. You can do that afterwards tonight or come back sometime within the next few weeks. The work is up till October 23rd. And I especially hope that those of you who spend a lot of time thinking about guns and gun issues will take a look at the exhibit. Because this is a topic that mainly lies within the realm of politics and the law and social issues, and I think you'll find that it's interesting to get an artist's take on the subject of guns. One of the great contributions that artists can make in our lives is to be able to give us a completely different perspective on something, and I think you'll find that if you're open to that, that's what this exhibit does. So please make a point of checking it out. So what we thought we'd try to accomplish tonight, specifically, is to get a better handle on the nature of gun issues right here in our part of the world. It occurred to those of us who were putting together the exhibit and these events, that a lot of what dominates our impression of guns and gun issues are news stories, mostly from other parts of the country, and political battles that are playing out on a national stage, and that we might not be as aware of what's actually the reality of guns and gun issues and right here in our backyard, in Brattleboro and Windham County in the state of Vermont, across the river in New Hampshire. Can include New Hampshire. Is this a big issue here? Are guns a problem here? If so, what's the nature of that problem and what needs to happen to fix it? And on the flip side, are there things that we're doing right here that are different than elsewhere, and maybe that other communities can learn from our experience? Each of tonight's panelists has a valuable perspective on those questions and on gun issues in our community in general. And I'm so grateful that they've all agreed to take part in this conversation. Braden is the founder and organizer of Gun Sense Vermont, which describes itself as a grassroots organization of Vermonters who support stronger laws to ensure that guns stay out of the wrong hands. Mark Kerrigan is a captain with the Brattleboro Police Department. Clai Lasher-Sommers is an advocate for survivors of gun violence. And Kelly Price of the Vermont State Police is the game warden for our area and an authority on hunter safety. The way I thought we'd go about this tonight is to give each of our panelists maybe as much as 10 or 15 minutes, less if that's what they prefer, to dive into these questions and these issues from each of their particular perspectives. As each one wraps up, I might have a follow-up comment or question, but generally we'll wait till everyone's done and then open it up for questions and comments from all of you. I know that some of you are deeply involved in gun issues and could have been part of this panel here tonight. I'm grateful that you're here and look forward to hearing what you have to say. And I would just ask that everyone be absolutely respectful of one another tonight, especially when you don't like what you're hearing someone else say. That can be difficult when you don't agree with what's being said. But that's what I want to ask of you, and I'm sure you can do it, and I thank you in advance for that. So thank you again for being here. Thanks to all of you. That's certainly more than enough for me. So now I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to ask Ann to get us started.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
I was pleasantly surprised to find out about this panel. And, I went yesterday to the exhibit to see, and if you haven't seen it, I really encourage you to look at it. I think my favorite part of it is the wall of gun owner portraits, where it's talking about why people own guns, and there's so many different reasons, and so many really legitimate reasons. It's like for target practice, or just because for self-defense, because they like the history of it. My grandfather's shotguns were on the wall at my grandparents' house, and some guns are just really exquisite machines. And I think that it's important to recognize how many gun owners are really responsible and take gun safety really seriously, and that for them the gun is simply a tool. And my organization, Gun Sense Vermont, is really, we're focused only on the small fraction of people that are not responsible and should not have access to guns because they are a convicted domestic abuser, a felon. Reasons like that, where the gun is no longer a tool, but it's used as something to really wield power over someone else in a very unfair way. And I think that because of the gun's efficiency, it can turn a balanced relationship into an out-of-balance relationship instantly. And in this work, I've really come to have numerous conversations with people in the domestic violence field who have been either affected by domestic violence themselves or are working with others who have been affected by domestic violence. And the most powerful thing for me is just the knowledge that sort of in homes where we don't see it, there are people being threatened on a daily basis just by the presence of a gun, someone putting it down on the kitchen table, and that is creating a situation where the other person is living in fear. And I was actually talking to the state's attorney in Windsor, so a little farther afield, but just last week, and he was talking about how he he was having a conversation with a woman trying to decide whether or not she should get a relief from abuse order from her partner. And he had been abusing her, and they're trying to figure out the next steps, and they're basically going through a pro and con assessment. And I was like, well, one of the advantages is that then he can't get a gun. And she's like, yeah, but can't you get one on Craigslist? And you can't actually get a gun on Craigslist, but you can on Arms List, which is basically the Craigslist version of guns. You can sort by private sale and sort for Vermont and find a whole long list of guns that are available. And so right now, so she's like, and doesn't the relief from abuse order, isn't that going to make him angrier if he gets that? And so her decision about whether or not to get this relief from abuse order was sort of wrapped around the idea that we do not currently require a background check on all gun sales, no matter where they are held. It only happens at a gun hearing where it's required. And so our Gun Sense Vermont, the group that I head, is really focused on universal background checks as a way to make sure that it's not that domestic abusers do not have easy access. And it doesn't mean that all domestic abusers would be prevented from getting a gun, but it means it wouldn't be easy, at least. And so that's something where we're sort of focused on just those very, that narrow group of gun owners that I feel like most people agree should not have access. And I think that one of the things that Vermont has really done well at is that, there is a very strong valuing of the Second Amendment, and I think that that is important. I think that it makes sense to, for example, when we were pushing for a bill or 2 sessions ago, in 2015, in the committee hearing rooms, people were, looking at the Vermont Constitution, exactly what does it say here. We want to make sure that that right is being upheld for people who are law-abiding citizens, that they can still have access to guns, and this is only going to be applying to, in that case, it was violent felons, who we were saying should be prohibited from possessing weapons. And so I think it's really important that we're having these discussions that balance, rights of law-abiding gun owners, and also say, okay, but there needs to be certain protections in place so that as a society, we're doing our job to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous individuals. And so in terms of the challenges, I think that there's been a disconnect for decades in terms of, there's been an imbalance for decades in terms of the power dynamic in the legislature, where it's just sort of assumed you don't talk about guns. And because of that, because there was no discussion, things sort of crept further and further out of balance. You end up with the interstate and the internet, and suddenly things are different for Vermont. And so for us as an organization, there was a real challenge at the beginning because public opinion was very clearly in support of closing the loopholes in the background check system. But there was, in the State House, no one wanted to talk about that issue. And so we really needed to create a whole organization to say, these are our voices, and we want to make sure that they are being heard in the legislature. And so we've certainly made progress on that. We got this, we did not get background checks passed 2 years ago, but we did get the small felony prohibition. So violent felons couldn't get background, violent felons were prohibited, so that if a violent felon had a gun in possession, they were able to, law enforcement could do something at the state level. And there was also another piece that said that if those who've been adjudicated as a danger to themselves or others, those names would be incorporated into the background check system, so that they would also be prohibited in effect, and that could actually be enforced. And then the third piece was a piece that came out of Gun Owners of Vermont's idea, which was a really good one, that we do a gun shop project here in Vermont, just like they did in New Hampshire. And that was a great suicide prevention education piece that was able to go through. And so some progress was made in that guns were discussed, pros and cons of bills were debated, and that was really a wonderful thing to see. And so we're sort of on the path moving forward, but it's still, no matter how much progress we've made, it's still a really hard issue to get, to have people discussing, not in a polarized way, but really focusing on that common ground and those moderate positions, and finding ways that people can come together, and it's not anti-gun or pro-gun, it's just gun responsibility.
Anne, thank you. You got us off to a great start. I meant to say beforehand that if any of you prefer to come stand up here behind the podium, you're more than welcome to do that if you prefer to be standing while you're talking. But it's also fun just to speak from where you are. So Anne, thank you, and Mark, turn it over to you.
I'm going to stay right here. As Danny said, my name is Mark Kerrigan. I'm a captain with the Brattleboro Police Department. I've been there for about 14 years. I started police work in 1996 in New Hampshire. I worked in a larger city over there for a number of years before I got married and came back here. My wife's from this area originally, so that's how I ended up back over here. We're here to talk about guns, which is obviously a topic that a lot of people are interested in and a lot of people talk about. You don't have to read too many newspapers or watch too many news cycles to hear something about guns, whether it's something good about guns or something negative about guns. But Danny asked us here to talk about sort of the local perspective of guns, Vermont, Brattleboro, Windham County, New England, that sort of thing. I can tell you from a police perspective, there are a lot of guns in our community. I don't say that with any type of judgment, just a statement of fact. There are a lot of guns in our community. A lot of the homes that police officers go to when we're responding to calls, regardless of what kind of call it is, have guns in them. The victim of a burglary might have a gun in their home, and we go and we take the report of a burglary. Someone had a hard time with an employee at work, and they asked us to come to their house to take a statement about that. So we'll go and we'll talk about that, and they just happen to have a gun in their house. There are a lot of guns in the community, and police officers sometimes see them and we sometimes don't, but they're out there, and we're aware of that, and the people are aware of that. Now, that's not to say that guns very often play a role in the incident that we're handling. I'm going to make that differentiation. Yes, there are a lot of guns. Yes, we know they're out there. Yes, they're in a lot of the homes we go to, but they are not involved in a lot of the incidents that we deal with. So all of those several examples that I just gave you, the gun played absolutely no role in it. It was in a closet or in a safe or something in someone's house because they use it for hunting, or maybe they use it for target practicing, or maybe it's their great-grandfather's gun that they are going to pass down, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe it's a handgun that's locked up somewhere that they only take when they go to the bank and they carry it for personal protection. Who knows? But it doesn't often play any kind of a role in the incident or the reason that the police are there. Vermont's kind of a unique state in that way. In my experience and my perspective, and I don't mean this as a political statement, it's just a statement of my experience as a police officer. Brattleboro and Vermont in particular have pretty high gun ownership rates from what I understand. We have a pretty high rate of gun ownership. But we have relatively low rates of gun crime. We don't have a lot of street crime. We don't have a lot of shootings that are happening on the street, that type of stuff. So it's kind of unique in that regard. Vermont has, as I think most of you probably know, very, very liberal gun laws. Libertarian might be a better way to put it than liberal gun laws, lowercase l. And it's interesting, you don't need a permit to carry a handgun in Vermont, open carry or concealed. Any number of you could be carrying handguns in here right now, and no one would know have a gun in your purse. It wouldn't be a violation of any law. It might be a violation of a rule that the museum has, but there's no law that prevents that, and you don't need a permit to do it. A lot of people are very surprised to learn what Ann just talked to us about. Up until last year, there was no state law in Vermont that said that convicted felons couldn't own firearms. A lot of people hear that and it almost kind of washes over them because it seems so ridiculous to them. There was no state law until 2015 that said that a convicted felon, you're convicted of robbery, kidnapping, and murder. When you get out of jail on parole, you could go and buy a gun, and you would not be violating a state law. You'd be violating a whole bunch of federal laws, but you wouldn't be violating any state laws. So the legislature last year passed a law that it's a crime for a violent felon to possess a firearm now. It's a misdemeanor, interestingly enough, but it's still a crime. So I talked about guns a little bit and how they're around. I don't want you to also think that we never see guns, because we certainly do. We certainly encounter guns, I won't say often, but certainly not infrequently in our day-to-day work. We arrest people for possessing drugs and selling drugs. We execute search warrants at people's homes for selling heroin and whatnot, and sometimes they have guns in the house. We seize the guns, and that's an additional charge. Sometimes the federal government will charge them with crimes related to that. Now sometimes they have state charges that will be brought against them as well. We have a fair number of robberies in Brattleboro. We're a couple of ticks above the state average for robberies. I can tell you from personal and professional experience that those are probably in the mid-90s or higher percent motivated by drug addiction. The vast majority of our robberies in town are committed by heroin addicts or opiate addicts of some variety. And some of those are armed robberies, and obviously as we investigate those and we make arrests, we seize guns in those circumstances. So we do run into guns. Sometimes it's in a criminal aspect, sometimes it's in a perfectly innocent aspect. Sometimes we'll deal with folks that are carrying a handgun in a non-criminal type of a situation. I can tell you that can be a little unnerving for a police officer, but if Joe Citizen is on the street and they're carrying a handgun, they have every right to carry the handgun. They're not violating any laws. They're allowed to carry it. They are carrying it. Again, like I said, sometimes it can be a little bit disconcerting, but they have as much right to carry it as anybody else. I think Kelly will probably talk to you even more about circumstances where he deals with people that I think everybody Kelly deals with is armed because he's a game warden. I don't know, he probably is a very minority of the time that he deals with people that aren't. But he'll talk to you about that. So we do see them and we do deal with guns in the community. The area where guns come up in police work, where I think that we have a concern and that we struggle with them, is that a gun can, and alluded to this just a little bit, if bad decisions are being made and impulsive behavior is occurring, that results oftentimes, sometimes, in criminal activity. Bad decisions are being made and impulsive decisions are being made and a gun is present, that can have, doesn't always, can have pretty significant and dramatic results. A gun is a very, very efficient tool or efficient weapon, as she said. The places that we see them that are probably most tragic from a public safety aspect are suicides and domestic violence homicides. If a person is feeling suicidal and they have immediate access to a firearm, there's a good likelihood that suicidal ideation and suicidal effort is going to be successful. There's a reason that women, statistically, women attempt to commit suicide at a much higher rate than men do. Attempt to commit suicide at a much higher rate than men do. Men successfully commit suicide at a much higher rate than women do. And the reason is because of the methods that are chosen. Again, broad statistics, women generally try to kill themselves by cutting themselves, medication, things like that, which are not particularly efficient. Men often try to kill themselves with firearms, which are very, very efficient. So from a public health standpoint, I wouldn't even say public safety, public health standpoint, that's a concern for the police, and I think is a concern for everybody. Domestic violence situations, an ordinary domestic dispute, if there is such a thing, could involve an assault, like a misdemeanor assault or a felony level assault. If a firearm is present, that can pretty efficiently elevate to becoming a homicide or becoming a shooting. But I do want to say this. I have been to, over the course of 20 years, dozens of domestic disputes where someone was arrested out of the home. Man, woman, usually the man, because it's just the way it goes. And there are guns present in the home. And no one got shot, no one got killed. It's locked up in a safe. He uses it for hunting, or she uses it for hunting. So I don't want to make you think that, oh, if you've got a domestic dispute and there's a gun there, someone's going to die. That's not at all the case. We very often go to domestic disputes where someone gets arrested and there are guns there in the house and no one gets hurt, or excuse me, no one gets injured with the gun. So it's a very complex issue. I talk about suicides, I talk about domestic disputes and that sort of thing. I don't know what the solution to those particular public safety and public health things are. I don't want to be making a political statement and saying background checks are the way to go, or registration of all firearms is the way to go, or no one should own firearms is the way to go. I don't know what the solution is, but those are problems from a police perspective that we see. Those are issues and concerns as police officers that we see. I won't talk too much about stolen guns that get taken out of state and traded for guns, or guns that are purchased here and brought out of state and traded for drugs. We can talk about that, I imagine we're gonna have some questions and conversation about that. But the immediacy of action of guns and the exceptional efficiency of guns, I see as a public health issue sometimes, but I don't know what the solution to that is. I don't know if it's more gun control, if it's is it a mental health issue that needs to be addressed? Is it a social service issue that needs to be addressed? Or is it a legal enforcement issue that the legislature needs to pass laws and cops need to arrest people? That's only one of a multitude of solutions to guns. I think that's the one that people most often focus on, is we're going to pass laws and the cops are going to arrest people who shouldn't have guns. That's a way to deal with it, but that's only a way to deal with it. There are a lot of other public policy ways that firearms can be managed and dealt with and owned and registered or not registered. There's a lot of moving parts to it. So I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of my perspective, the police perspective. And I look forward to questions and discussion about it.
Thank you, Mark. That's incredibly helpful and interesting. And I'm sure, I know a lot of people are now taking out pens and are jotting down thoughts and questions and stuff. So we'll definitely have time for all of that. And now I'd like to turn it over to Clai.
I'm a little different on this panel. I was shot when I was 13 years old in a house where there was domestic violence and where there were guns. And the police would not come to my house, but a game warden came to my house. Actually saved my life and saved my brother's life. So I've been looking at this issue for over 45 years, I would say. I've been involved with the issue for that long. I was the director of a battered women's project and a rape crisis center. I've done some other things, and at this stage in my life, I have a farm, an organic farm in New Hampshire, and I work with survivors all over the country of gun violence. So I have, I would say, some pretty strong opinions about the issues that surround guns. But I believe in most of what Ann said. You know, as I travel across the country and I work with gun violence survivors and I get them ready to testify, the thing that I keep running up against all the time is that not one survivor out of over 850 survivors think that there should be gun control in this country. And I think that the word gun control is a big problem. Anytime you put the word control next to something, there's going to be a reaction. So I just wanted to say that up front, because I think that what we're talking about is gun sense, gun responsibility, and gun safety. And that's really what we're talking about, and we're talking about culture shifts. Most of the work that I do locally, I've done some work here, but is in New Hampshire. I live about 10 minutes from here, across that bridge. And I think that New Hampshire has, for instance, you have to have a permit to have a pistol to carry. There, just like Vermont, there's a strong belief in Second Amendment, and that Second Amendment rights go along with guns. So, you know, I think in communities you can have that discussion as much as you want, as often as you want. Is it particularly helpful? I'm not sure that it is, because what we're talking about, again, is gun safety. And responsible gun ownership. One of the things, you know, the officer was talking about suicide and domestic violence. So suicide, I could probably talk statistics for a long time, and I don't like to do that, so I'm not going to do that. But statistically, this one fact, suicide is the highest rate of gun fatalities in this country. So when you think about gun violence across the country, in Vermont, in New Hampshire, it's the highest rate of deaths because that gun is immediate and the person dies, commits suicide. And that, I mean, I have always found that surprising. And when we break it down into, you know, are people white? Is it black? Is it Indian? What is the cultural relevance of the suicide? It's mostly white men, which I also have found pretty interesting. In domestic violence houses, I do know that in 58% of a house where there's domestic violence, there's 58% more women that are killed. And that issue is a cultural issue. It's an issue of balance of power. It's not an issue that's going to be solved. You know, I don't know how to solve this. I mean, I have a lot of ideas. I've worked with a lot of domestic violence. A lot of it is education. But the amount of domestic violence that, first of all, there's domestic violence with guns that is very underreported. And that, because they don't result in a fatality. But guns are often used as, like Ann said, put on the table, threatening women, threatening children. So there's no law that you can come up with to stop that kind of, you know, behavior. But that's just an imbalance of power. So the only other thing that I wanted to say, and that I see in New Hampshire a lot, and it's underreported also, is because of the opiate rates going up 90, you know, what we call it, the iron pipeline, and drug pipeline, but because of 91 going up and on the other side of the state of New Hampshire in 93, most of the times when there is an arrest made for drugs, they will find, you know, and drug arrest where there's heroin, specifically, they find caches of guns, money, and since we've started tracking New Hampshire, that is a really huge problem. Is because there's guns that you might not have seen in the state before that now you see in the state. And they're used, people, you know, there's a lot of discussion about people going from Maine to New Hampshire to Vermont to Massachusetts, where we don't have background check laws, where guns are going in between these state borders, which is, it's a huge problem. So I just wanted to say from a survivor's viewpoint that I think, you know, it's one thing to talk about, is it an issue in your neighborhood, is it an issue in our communities? It is an issue in our communities. I mean, the fact that I can't turn on the television without, you know, more gun violence is an indication to me that maybe New Hampshire and Vermont don't have huge amounts of gun deaths, but I always just hold my breath and think, I just hope it doesn't happen here. I hope we don't have a mass shooting here. And we define mass shootings by 4 or more people. And I know that in New Hampshire last year, there were 2 mass shootings, and they were all involved with domestic violence. This year, there was at least 1 mass shooting that I know about. So when we think that, you know, when you're watching the news and you hear the word mass shooting, it's not always Aurora or Newtown or all the other mass, Charleston. I think in rural Northeast, a lot of them have to do with domestic violence. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have afterwards, but.
Thank you, Clay.
You're welcome.
Kelly.
Thank you. First, I got to correct something. I work for the Fish and Wildlife Department, Law Enforcement Division, not the state police, just to make sure we're clear on that. Here in my own time, because I'm not representing the department, I was asked to talk about this from obviously a job aspect. but also to come in personally and discuss it. That's why I didn't my flash uniform. I want to speak, myself and the experiences I've had through my job. So on that note, community-wise, like the captain spoke earlier, we're really no different law enforcement-wise than any other law enforcement in the state police, municipal, in our enforcement ability. But what makes our job unique, as was pointed out, is unlike those unknown risk car stops that general law enforcement have to deal with on a daily basis, we pretty much expect everyone we deal with to be armed. And it's normal for us to deal with people who are armed, to the point where, depending how you view it, we're more relaxed around people who are armed. Not to say that we aren't vigilant and ready to do whatever we need to do to protect ourselves, but the point is that we deal with sportsmen who are, for my 15 years of being on the job, responsible with their firearms. And I personally haven't experienced any interactions involving firearms that have resulted in a death of an individual. Have I gone to accidents? Yes, where someone had accidentally inflicted some type of firearm injury on themselves, but not where there was a purposeful act to do harm to a law enforcement officer or member of the public. And here in Vermont, especially being a game warden, I get to see the fact that we have a culture here that enjoys the sporting aspect of owning a firearm. They're out there hunting, they're participating in that sporting activity. I do not deal with as much as the captain on the state police in the domestic aspect. I do acknowledge that is an area of concern and should be an area of concern. But I can also say from my experiences that it's difficult to go into a home or to deal with an individual who you know probably is a prohibited individual. Knowing that they shouldn't be possessing a firearm, and when that used to be reported, because back before we had the state law that was previously mentioned, it was only the federal government's responsibility to get involved, and the vast majority of the time that there was no involvement. So that kind of brings me to the topic of laws, and we have laws, a lot of laws, to protect us, to protect the public, to protect, to influence gun ownership, responsible gun ownership. But laws only go so far, and being someone who also enforces the laws, you find out pretty quick you have two types of people. You have the people in this room who are law-abiding citizens, I have to assume, and then you have individuals who are not. And there's no law in the world, or no law that we would ever put in place that's going to change that dynamic. You're either going to be someone who abides by the law, or someone who's going to break the law. And I don't know if we could ever fix that issue. That does not mean at all that I'm saying we should not do everything we can to protect people and protect the public and to protect men and women in situations where there could be domestic violence or some type of violence that would involve a firearm. I would never say that, but I just kind of want to bring up the point that it's a very difficult topic because I don't know what the fix is. If we had a fix, it probably would be here already. But the knee-jerk reaction politically to create laws don't always fix the problem, because we have a lot of laws already that don't get enforced. I think that the majority of people here in Vermont are responsible. I know this just from, I've been a law enforcement officer for 15 years, like I stated. Originally came up here from Western Mass, being a state that is much more strict than Vermont. And kind of the case in point is the gun ownership being as high as it is in Vermont And I know per capita we're a low population compared to other parts of the country, but we have a very high gun ownership with very little gun crime. And the gun crime that we do have is usually related to some other illicit activity, usually. As the captain pointed out, drugs, that type of thing. And as also pointed out, guns are oftentimes associated with those illicit activities during the car stops, which make them much more risky to all of us in that law enforcement profession. I find that I also go into the homes and see the heirlooms or the hunting rifles, the handguns, and don't have any issues, nor do I feel any concern for my safety. Do I ask people to put them away? Sure, for their safety and mine, but that's just a responsibility thing. So I personally in the community, from my experience, don't see us for being a state that has very lax gun laws, that we have a significant problem of any sort. Do we have areas of improvement from a domestic violence aspect? I'm sure we do, but I'm not going to sit here and say what those are or how to achieve them. But we do have work to do, and how that comes into play will take time and take some serious consideration by lawmakers and members of the public with their input. So I could go on, and there's a lot of stuff that I prepared, but I'm going to leave it at that.
Kelly, thank you. Thanks all of you. I'm going to open it up to questions here in just a second, but I just want to say, even at this juncture, there are 40 or so of us sitting out here, and speaking for myself, and I'm sure for many of us, I feel much more informed than I was an hour ago on these issues, and I also have a lot of questions, and just thinking about these things in a new way, and I'm really grateful for that. So thank you. I'm going to hang out up here so I can see and call on people who would like to ask questions or offer comments. So I open it up to you all. Yeah, Amelia.
Yeah, this is a question for Kelly, since you won't ask. You say that you haven't seen a lot of problems in Vermont with our liberal gun laws here. Would you say that you have, through the media or other means, heard of big problems with guns in other areas of the country? And do you think that if those problems are there, they could come here? And if so, should we be prepared? Is there something we should do now to prepare for the kinds of problems we're seeing in some other areas?
Do I see that on the media? Absolutely, we all do, on a regular basis, to one extent or another. But to bring up probably one of the most dramatic, I think, examples, and this is kind of those quick pick examples that we all know about, but let's take Illinois, let's take Chicago for an example. And I don't want to make this into a platform for preaching, but you talk about, how things can come to our community from a different community. You have areas of the country that are plagued by different issues, and those issues have repercussions. And that particular area, for example, has different gun laws than we do. And there's repercussions for that, no matter how you look at it. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, I'm just pointing it out. And whether you're on one side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle, you can make an argument on either side as to whether what happens there is working versus what goes on here is working. I don't know if you can prepare for what exactly? I mean, what are we preparing for? Are we preparing for a situation like a big city like that? Like we're just going to start to have a bunch of gun violence? I don't know if that's something you can prepare for. It's a cultural thing. It's a city thing.
For example, Newtown.
A shooting situation. If you want to use that example, a shooting situation, I don't think you can, unfortunately, these tragedies and being in law enforcement, the tragedies affect you dramatically, and you try to compartmentalize it for your own sanity, the things you see and the things you deal with. Tragedies like that, unfortunately, I know, are always going to happen. There's almost nothing you can do to stop them, and that's a horrible thing to hear myself say, because I deep down believe that there's almost nothing we can do to stop them, because when you have a crazed individual who's not going to obey the law and is bent on destroying people's lives and our fellow human beings, I don't know what we can do to stop that. You're going to have crazy people all over this world forever. The times we're living in are difficult times. That's a very difficult question to answer satisfactorily for myself and probably to all of you. I mean, I look at the ideas of and many of you know this, the gun-free zones that have kind of come up around the country, however you want to look at it. And I look at those and I say to myself, I see them, and I say, the criminal or that person, that lunatic none of that matters to them. So, and it brought me to the law discussion. You're either going to obey the laws or you're not. And I don't know what we can do to stop mass tragedies like that in the future. I wish I had the answer.
Clay, did you want to say something?
I would like Anne to respond.
Because you live in Vermont. Well, I think that I think mass shootings get our attention, certainly. And for me, they really highlighted how out of balance our lack of gun laws were, that we didn't seem to be trying to really do anything to try to stop dangerous individuals from accessing guns. And so I think that, I think certainly one can go too far and think, oh, this is going to solve it, and really, no law is going to solve these things. But I think as a society, I think we have a basic responsibility to be looking at, okay, what laws are on the books? How are they being enforced? Are there some places like the federal law that prohibits, this range of people from possessing weapons? Are we actually able to enforce that? And for a lot of people, I think, for many people, I think they see that background checks are actually a way to enforce keeping certain individuals from possessing weapons. And so it's not going to affect everyone, but I think in a similar way to it's a really, the suicide statistics that the captain was referring to. It's a very powerful example of how easy access to a gun has very quick and immediate results. And I think it's the same thing with, using a gun in anger towards other people. That if it's really easy to go get a gun, then it is. And if we put certain obstacles that are reasonable and are not affecting all law-abiding gun owners, but are, only targeted towards those who have a track record of being dangerous and violent, then I feel like that's a step that our society should be taking.
May I make that comment just about the mass shooting thing? We're talking about mass shootings, and I think we could all, in a general context, agree that some of your more heinous mass shootings are committed by people with significant mental health problems. I think that's a relatively safe thing to say. I'm not offending too many people by saying that. So let's say we have background checks, universal background checks, or sometimes universal, or whatever law happens to be passed, then what happens is one of the things that prohibits you from purchasing a firearm, obtaining a firearm, getting a firearm, is if you've been adjudicated mentally incompetent by a judge. I would be curious to know how many people actually know what that means. So that's a tremendous thing to have happen. There are a lot of steps that have to happen for someone to be adjudicated as mentally incompetent by a judge. It's exceptionally rare. It's very, very rare. So we also live, and I talked about how this dichotomy of public policy, or this divergence of public policy, we live in a state and we live in a community that's very hesitant to say, you're crazy, right? No one does that. We don't label people. We don't want to label people. This person is handicapped or invalid or schizophrenic, or like, we don't want to do that, right? Because, you know, with the deinstitutionalization of mental health facilities in the 70s and 80s, we kind of let people out of the community, and we need to integrate them in the community and that sort of thing. And our community's all for that kind of thing. So, not to put too fine a point on it, but which one do you want? Do we want to identify people that might be mentally incompetent to own guns, but we don't want to label them? But we want to label them maybe when it comes to guns. It's a public policy thing that I think needs to maybe get straightened out. There is definitely a split there. And the same sort of liberal community that we have, which is a great community, wants to hold both of those values at the same time. We don't want people that are mentally incompetent to have guns, but we want them to be able to get a job and a driver's license and walk around the community without being pointed at and saying, you're crazy. So where's that line? That's not a legal thing, that's not a police thing, that's a public policy and a public health thing that I think needs to get resolved. Speaking specifically about the school shootings, domestic violence, robberies, drugs, a whole other conversation. But speaking of mass shootings like that, I think that's something that we need to kind of look ourselves as a society in the mirror and say, we need to find a middle ground here. Which way do we want it? We need to kind of bring those two things back together and figure that out.
David, can I say something about the schools?
And David, in just one second, I just wanted to see if Clay wanted to add to
No, not yet.
Okay, so thank you.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
in response to preparing and the example of Newtown, immediately after Newtown, the school boards all met and decided to install cameras and to put, in fact, to hire people to stand at the door and keep the doors locked, and after that to install remote locks and cameras so that the schools are relatively secure. And we also met extensively with law enforcement to come up with protocols for administrators and teachers to follow, and really making sure that the kids are taught that in any situation, listen to the teacher. Don't figure out, don't think of anything you're going to do, listen to what the teacher tells you. And Mark, I don't think if you were a part of that, those conversations or not.
Sure, the Brattleboro actually has a very comprehensive school crisis plan, but, and it's a very valuable thing that we have, but it's more of a response, it's not a prevention. This is what we're going to do if it happens. So we're certainly prepared to do a whole comprehensive set of things, God forbid if something like that were to happen, but from a prevention standpoint,
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm somewhat of an expert on the suicide prevention as antidotes. We take extensive courses on it. Also, the part about mentally handicapped people. An adjudicated person who's a danger to themselves or others, 99,000 times out of 100 is somebody who is, say, a diabetic who refuses to take insulin, or an anorexic who refuses to eat. They can be adjudicated as a person who's a danger to themselves. That doesn't make them violent. And to ostracize those kind of people is absolutely ludicrous, because they are not harmless, they just need a little bit of help. On the suicides, from what I've learned over the course of, 2 years now, the vast majority of suicides are done within the first 25 minutes of deciding they want to kill themselves. And it is a tragedy when something like that happens on certain instances. Other instances, a person has terminal cancer, they're suffering. We've already had laws put in place for assisted suicide. And I don't really have a problem with that. If you're going and you don't want to suffer for months on months, that's a good thing. And none of your laws would stop any of this. For the simple reason that in the suicides and a lot of the domestic abuses, people already have guns. They don't have to go through background checks. It's also against the law, the federal law, to go purchase a firearm interstate through the internet. It's already a federal law that's very strictly enforced. So I'd like, actually, we have 2 officers here. Captain Carrigan, okay. How many murders have you had to investigate in Brattleboro since you've been on the job here?
Myself personally, 3.
Well,
I've been involved with more
the
than that.
department.
The department?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe half a dozen, 6.
And that's over how many years?
14, a little over 14.
Okay, so that's less than 1 per year, which actually is any murder is a tragedy, but, we think about other places like Massachusetts, New York State, where it's happening a lot. I find it hard to believe that, and we've always been polite to each other, I mean no offense, that people don't trust the good and honest people of Vermont who for the past 220 years have responsibly owned and used firearms. Any murder is a problem, but if you think about it, people have been getting murdered. If you're a religious type, since Cain and Abel. If you're not, since the caveman. Do you honestly believe that you can stop something like this?
Is that
Anyone other than? Sorry.
I think I've said this before, is that it's not going to stop all of it, but we have a basic responsibility to women who are being intimidated, and men who are being intimidated by guns, day in and day out, who are living with this as a reality, that they should know that if they go to the police and they get a relief from abuse order, and the police disarm that abuser, take those guns, that person cannot then go around and go straight to armslist.com, where it's not out of state, it's just, did you read that Paul Hines article from 7 days, how I got an AR-15 in the Five Guys parking lot in South Burlington? I mean, he did that in 5 hours. This is not an abstract concept, just people that are living with it.
Thank you.
Can't buy it on the internet without that.
Yes, you can.
Period.
Yes, you can.
No, you
You
can't.
can't pick it up, you can.
Sir,
You can't pick it up, you have to go to an FFL.
You know what, I could take I'm not gonna argue with you, but on the way here, I just wanted to check. I pulled up Arms List Vermont. Now, Arms List Vermont, or armslist.com, but if you put in the search engine just for Vermont, you will see licensed gun dealers, and then you will see private sales. The private sales happen. They happen in parking lots. They happen everywhere. I mean, it just happened. It happened 3 years ago at Hannaford's. I mean, this stuff happens. And
You know what also happens?
Excuse me, sir, there were several other people who had been waiting and then put their hands up, so I'll come back to you if you still want to make a point after they've had a chance.
My question is for law enforcement. Current background checks, it's a federal system that we've got to enforce now. When somebody is denied,
I got a hard enough.
at what point are you folks notified that the individual was denied? I know they're not, the dealers aren't told why they're denied, they're just denied. Are you folks notified so that you can go check why is this denied person seeking a firearm?
It's an interesting question. We get notified of certain things. FFLs, you mentioned FFLs, are required by their licenses to notify us of certain things. That's not one of them.
So the current background check system, there's no follow-up.
I can tell you if my department knows that a prohibited person tried to find or buy a gun, we're going to go and investigate that and find out what's going on.
But I mean,
if we're not notified of it, then no.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not picking on Sam's Army Navy over here, but because they're right across the road. If they're denied, someone's trying to buy something there and they're denied, you're not notified, there's no background check. I know when you have to purchase a firearm, you have to sign, answer a bunch of questions under penalty of law, $250,000 fine, years in prison. You sign your name on the bottom, but there's no ramifications for lying on that form then.
You're asking a couple questions there. It's kind of a compound question. There are absolute ramifications for lying on that form. You can go to prison for lying on that form.
Right, but
Your question was, are we notified if...
Federal.
I don't know if the ATF is or not, but I know that we're not.
Okay.
Did you
Can I
want to
just
respond
add
to that?
one thing? And I think that if there, I think that actually is a good example of a law that would help enforce the larger law. That, someone who's prohibited should not be able to try to buy a gun. And in the case of the mass shooting in Barry, that the alleged shooter had tried twice to buy guns at gun dealers and was rejected both times. And I think that, that's something that should be discussed as, that could be a very good preventative way as, a red flag to say, let law enforcement know, this person's trying to buy a gun, and is it something that, needs to be looked at.
Thank you. Gentleman here.
And you had mentioned we passed a new law in Vermont that people who were adjudicated mentally ill are put on the next list.
A danger to themselves, or
Oh, right, that's right. Does that same adjudication apply to relief from abuse orders? So if you're saying is you want to have the police come out, there's a dispute between a couple, and, there's guns in the house, let's take them all, let's do something with them, and somebody gets arrested or not arrested, whatever the officers decide, those guns are taken away. Is that person who lost those guns adjudicated when those guns are taken, or before those guns are taken?
The relief from abuse order piece, I think that's a really good question, and I've actually asked a couple people, and I haven't gotten a clear answer.
They're not adjudicated.
Yeah, so I think that, it's...
So you're okay with not being adjudicated and losing your rights, and losing your actual personal property that you do already have. You're okay with that?
Say the question again.
Right now, you're taking firearms from people who are not adjudicated according to current law. You're a danger to yourself or others. You go through this process. You go through court, back and forth, and discuss everything. The judge makes a ruling. You're guilty. You're put on the next list. You can't buy it. What you're saying is with the relief from abuse orders, kind of bypasses that whole court thing. And signature on a piece of paper, and Captain Harrigan comes in and knocks on your door and takes your stuff.
I'm saying it's something that needs to be discussed, and I also think that a relief from abuse order is something can be, depending on the kind, can be temporary. And so I think that the fact that we have had this conversation about guns for decades means that we need to be examining these laws, looking at, okay, what's the situation in this case? What's the situation in this case? Is this person's constitutional right being upheld? But also, is this person, if this is just if we're talking about the 3 days after someone's just gotten a relief from abuse order, and that's the highest period of danger for the victim, let's weigh those together. So
is there a process in place right now with social services to remove both parties, separate them, instead of violating a constitutional right, separate those two parties, give them time to cool off, maybe get them counseling? Was there something else they can do other than under force of law that we're going to come and take your stuff, lock you up, whatever? Is there a piece, or is this, like I say, domestic violence is a long process sometimes. It's not just a one night, 30 seconds later, boom, argument, and we have, the officers coming knocking on doors.
I think that's a question for locally, the Women's Freedom Center, they do really great work. And it's a very complicated process.
I agree, it's very complicated. Maybe that should be the aspect that we take the closest look at, because we have lots of programs, lots of people involved. They're probably better able to identify and separate parties and give them both counseling way before the officers are involved.
Can I ask a question about a law?
Is it sort of connected to this? Because we're having several other people who are waiting to ask questions as well, so I don't want to spend too much time on this one discussion. Sir.
I got one question for Mark and one question kind of for everybody to see if they have the answer for it. Do you think that the NICS system is broke? Because it asks if you've been convicted of domestic assault, if you've had court ordered restraining orders, aggravated assault, all those things, if you answered yes, bars you from being able to buy the gun. Also, the FBI had to publicly come out and apologize because somebody that shouldn't have got a gun, they didn't respond. And the gun dealer let the gun go, which is the way the law works, as you know, 3 days and they can have the gun regardless of the response. And my other thing is after they disarmed Australia, do any of you guys know what happened to burglaries, home invasions, and specifically crimes against women, like sexual assaults and rape? Do you know what happened after they banned their guns?
So two questions. The first one was sort of a question that I hope you caught, and that was primarily directed to Captain Kerrigan.
Do you guys report like domestic assaults to NICS?
What's next?
It's the National Criminal Incident Check System. Like it's where it's
Police don't report anything to that because the things that will prohibit you are more under the control of the courts. If you're convicted of certain things, if you've had a domestic violence restraining order hearing and the judge has said, yep, this is a final order, if you're adjudicated as mentally incompetent on the federal level or danger to yourself or others on the state level, or those sorts of things, those aren't things that police, we initiate a lot of that stuff, but we don't make any of those final decisions, if you will, so we don't, local law enforcement, and Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't report things like that. I mean, they certainly have access to all of our data and all of our statistics and names and so on and so forth, but generally speaking, we don't report that. The courts report it, the state's report.
Essentially, if you're Brady disqualified, that comes into play from your background investigation through the courts.
But it doesn't always work.
Oh, I agree. I had an individual person who I know who had himself listed as Brady disqualified when he shouldn't have been, and he went through all kinds of hoops through the court to get it fixed because they had entered it wrong. So, and I'm not saying that, that's just one crazy example, but it can be both ways. Somebody who should be is not on the list, so it's a two-way street.
Yeah, I get the lead every time because there's a Jason Bushy over in Chittenden County, and we're the same age, so every time I go in, they never call gun stores back, ever. It's released to me without the FBI calling up and saying yes or no.
And to your second question, I can say that I have no idea what happened in Australia. I'm sure you're going to tell us, but I can surmise, but...
Across the board, all those crimes increased.
You know.
I also have a buddy that lives in Australia. He's like a general contractor and stuff, and he talks about it. I've also looked at their news articles and read what their police have to say because they started mentioning Australia, so I started looking at Australia, and it doesn't really work because the criminals don't care.
Well, that brought me to my whole point.
Sir.
I don't know if it's a question, but it's certainly a statement. I've been following what's been going on in Australia, and they have an underground arms trade that is unlike anything. Sydney police busted some underground lab that was building submachine guns for the biker gangs. So it's been an explosion of illegal firearms being manufactured underground. And it's they're busting somebody every week practically. It has not stopped the sale and manufacture of automatic weapons. In fact, it's increased.
I have two questions for Ann. First one, you said you're in the discussions about what to do, like universal background checks or whatever. Have you actually gone to gun clubs or Fish and Game and talked to people there? Because we have 450 members. And it wouldn't hurt to come and discuss with them, see what their ideas might be?
Early on, in the spring after we got started as an organization, I was emailing with a gun owner who disagreed with sort of the concept of background checks. But the email conversation started off that he assumed that I was anti-gun, and we were talking about it, and sort of we got to this point of a heated email discussion sort of really had calmed down. And so he was deployed at the time in Afghanistan with duty, lives in Wyndham County, and he suggested we meet at a shooting range when he got back and to continue the conversation. And so I agreed, and I met him there at the one in Guilford. And he showed me how to shoot, a dozen different guns, and I listened. And he talked about, why it was so important to him, why it was, why he was skeptical of gun laws, basically. And, it came to, I think that we both had this understanding of, everyone's basically operating on a certain level of fear, right? That there's, he was very focused on, if there was someone coming into his home, he wanted to be ready. And for me, I was focused more on I want to make it harder for the person who might be thinking about coming into my home to get a gun. So it wasn't, we weren't that far apart when it came down to it. And I think that finding that middle ground of respecting the Second Amendment and also figuring out, okay, how can we be a little proactive about this at the same time has been sort of important to me throughout the whole process. And actually soon after that I called, I can't remember his name, someone from the gun club and asked if I could come, but he said no.
Okay, my second question is regarding the universal background check. So from what I read, if you hand somebody a gun, if it's a universal background check, now you're a felon.
No, it's only if it's well, I think it depends on how the law is written, but usually they're written so that there's temporary transfers are exempt, family transfers are exempt. It's designed to not criminalize the, people that are just.
So we do a lot of firearms training, especially with women on target and hunter education in our club. And we provide the firearm. So if it comes to a point where it's illegal, you're handing somebody a gun to use, what are you supposed to do?
Right, no, that's
especially with 10-year-olds learning how to hunt.
Yeah, those things are usually exempt in the background check laws, including if someone needs it for self-defense.
Okay, actually, Ann, the law that you helped write, for the bill that you just helped write 2 years ago on universal background checks, would have made this scenario a violation of law. You, down in Guilford, once that guy transferred that firearm to you to use, would have been against the law. And this is what, we both went at this in the State House. Those two incidences right there, plus thousands of others throughout this state, would have made it become illegal. And I know pretty sure that Kelly saw somebody transferring the firearm over to another guy with no cross in the fence. Right now, you'd think, oh, that's a nice, safe thing to do. But if it wasn't somebody who was Kelly, 20 years down the road, it was somebody who hated firearms, they would have been busted. This is actually the law that you helped write.
I think that going forward, we should make sure that whatever law, whatever bill is being discussed, that those things are coming up. I mean, that's certainly, I don't think that's anyone's intent is to criminalize that kind of act.
What I see reoccurring is that we have situations that we need to remedy. We're just not really sure how to do it. I mean, it's really the bottom line. And so many times, and we see it not just in this discussion, but in so many other areas of writing laws and creating laws, that the law may be so well intended, but it has such unintended consequences because it wasn't fully thought through. And I see that happening over and over again in many different areas. So, I think this is a perfect example of taking time to discuss a super important issue to get everyone's input to possibly come to a proactive solution in the future.
Yeah. We all know that criminals don't care, and the laws is kind of more like oppression. And oppression means rebellion. We don't want that. We all believe in education. Let's make people care by educating them about gun safety and about the value of human life. And we're good.
On that note, I thought about that. And there's one thing that, and I had a discussion with someone in this room, might have been the gentleman in the back, just prior to this meeting about, I don't think it's even possible with the dynamics and the differences of personal opinion for whatever reason it is, to get a consensus and to educate everybody. Everybody has an opinion based on whatever they have an opinion based on. They're either here or they're here. And education is hugely important, for sure. I think people need to be informed. They don't need to just believe what they're hearing or seeing in the media or reading in the paper. You need to educate yourself. It's our duty, I think, as individuals to educate ourselves, not just believe what we're being told. Definitely want to emphasize that. But I don't believe that we could fix the problem by just doing that. Cities are completely different than the suburbs. Like Western Massachusetts, where I was from, completely different. Might as well be a different state from Boston. But yet, you have individuals in Boston making the laws for the people who live in the western part of the state based on their belief, their understanding of the way things should be. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what they believe. So it really comes down to differences of philosophy and figuring out how to mesh the two to make something work.
And yet, I don't think any of us would argue with the fact that nothing bad can come from doing more education, both educating yourselves and educating each other. And I feel like, you all took it upon yourselves to come out on a Thursday night to listen to other people in your community and listen to some people with some interesting and valuable, maybe even expert perspectives on this issue and learn something. And I had to be here, but even as someone who had to be here, I'm learning a ton, and I feel like that can only be helpful. Is there anyone else who Linda?
I'm the educator of the museum.
We're going to wind you down soon.
And I didn't have to be here, but I wanted to be here, and I'm not originally from Vermont, and I learned so much just in installing the artwork and in leading tour groups through this show. And I've learned so much tonight. I really want to give my appreciation for Danny and for everybody who was here, who had this mara for brainstorming the show and bringing it to our community, and for you guys for showing up and giving us your thoughtful commentary, because I've learned, I'm learning a lot. And I think the opportunity to talk about all this stuff is incredibly important. So there it is.
Absolutely, and that would be a perfect note to end on, but this gentleman also patiently.
The feeling I'm going to open my mouth and put my foot in it, because I really don't know much about the gun issues that you've been talking about. I come from a country where policemen don't carry guns anyway, or didn't when I was there. But I think we're struggling it seems like we're struggling to maintain a balance between opposing forces and work out what the best solutions could be. But we seem to ignore the whole issue of race. And it seems to me that the rest of the United States is struggling with that issue of gun violence. In Vermont, it's the largest state in the nation, so it isn't an issue. But nevertheless, it seems to me that it should be an issue that's discussed maybe at another seminar.
I think maybe what you've done is provide a segue for another exhibit and another exploration and another panel in the future. And Josh, you want to have
one just little quick thing just to add on to that. When I was speaking with Kelly out in the gallery before the talk, it really struck me when I was like, this is Vermont. I mean, yes, there's a hunting population. There's certainly some people who advocate heavily against gun, or not against guns, but for gun responsibility. But I would be, in reading through some of the comments in the books that people have left out there, very differing, thoughtful comments, but this would be an entirely different show if this exhibit were to travel with this same panel discussion of the captain from an Arizona Police Department, or California, or Atlanta, Georgia, or North Dakota. And I would be very curious to see how this exhibit and/or a discussion like this would be received differently in different parts of the country, because we are a predominantly white state, and, you know, there is, compared to many places in the country, very, very low gun crimes, and so, you know, what would this discussion look like in Chicago?
I've had this discussion in Chicago.
Same as it is here?
Yes.
It's the same discussion you're saying?
Not the exact same discussion, but a very close discussion. And you should all feel the privilege that you have to have this discussion here. Because in Chicago, mothers and fathers are losing their children at the highest rate ever. And they don't have this privilege to sit and have this kind of discussion, because in Englewood, in that part of Chicago, you know, people are working so hard every single day to have gun violence, to have it not part of their life. And, you know, they try to have these discussions, and there's no time for it, because there's all these shootings every day. And that's one of the safest states in the nation. And the guns coming in to Chicago, and then I'll just end, are coming from border states. So race is a huge thing in this issue. It's a huge thing, and thank you for bringing it up.
And thank you for giving us that context and that perspective as well. We appreciate that. I can't thank you all enough, not only for taking time to be here tonight, but for being so thoughtful and respectful of one another, and creating an occasion where I hope you feel, as I do, that we all will leave having learned something. And so I'm so grateful to all of you for that. And Anne, Mark, Clay, Kelly, thank you for what you do, and also for taking time out of your lives to be here with us tonight. And Kelly, did you want to...
Just real quick in closing, and this goes to your initial question to me, and I thought about this after the fact. If there's one thing that I would say to you about preparedness, and it goes far beyond necessarily this specific discussion, just more broadly, is that all of us as citizens have responsibility to be aware and to be vigilant. And us as law enforcement, you know, and I say this, you know, say something is the idea. Say something if something seems out of the ordinary. Because I have deep-seated fears, like a lot of people do, based around your question with a youngster that goes to school and those type of things. So I take that very seriously. So just everybody be vigilant, and we're all here for ourselves, to protect ourselves.
If I can add one piggy tail to that, you don't have to say it to us. So a lot of people are like, oh, New York City has the see something, say something thing. The Nazi cops want to just, you know, have everyone reporting on each other. You don't have to say it to us. Say it to each other. Say it to a mental health counselor. Say it to a counselor at the school. Say it to your doctor. Say it to their doctor. But if someone is acting erratically, something is of concern, if you want to say it to us, that's great. But say it to each other. Say it to other community members. I mean, it's a community issue. It's a community problem. We're not going to just pass a bunch of laws a month earlier and cops go throw handcuffs on a bunch of people and not have any more gun crime. It's not going to happen.
And also take the responsibility that our Constitution has given us, and be active and proactive in this issue. You know, if the state wants, you know, to do a background check bill, you know, get involved. There's no state in this nation that has a background check that didn't have a huge coalition of the sportsmen's, you know, club, and all the gun, you know, people who own gun shops. I mean, everybody has to be at that table. Everybody.
A round of applause.